Okay, in this video we're going to talk about exposure bracketing on Lumix cameras, and in this video we're going to be using the Panasonic GH6, but most Lumix cameras all have very similar kind of bracketing modes. You might be missing one or two features, but they'll mostly be there. So, you know, if you've got a different Lumix camera, you can kind of follow along. So bracketing essentially is a way of telling the camera to take a shot at different exposures in quick succession. And there are different types of bracketing, but we're specifically talking about exposure bracketing here. So the reason that you might want to use exposure bracketing is kind of to take a shot at multiple exposures, and then you can merge them all together to create a HDR style image. So you're essentially taking a few different shots, merging them together and creating a sort of a dynamic range beyond what the camera is actually capable of. So a good example of when you might want to use it, I use it mostly for if people ask me to shoot properties, and then if the property's got nice kind of exterior views, so I can get a good exposure in the property, and then the outside the windows generally is going to be overexposed, but with bracketing I can actually take a lower exposure, merge them together, and then, you know, if the outside isn't like a bin or someone else's wall, I can show that. So if they've got a nice view of like the coast, or it's just like a nice Greenland outside, then I'll definitely be looking to use bracketing to show that. So what we'll do is we'll just kind of we'll jump into the bracketing menu, and I'll kind of show you how it works. So if we go into the menu on the camera, and then we just want to go into the camera icon, and we're looking for the camera with the three dots under it, the first one, and that's the Others Photo 1 menu. And you can see here just above silent mode we've got bracketing. So if we click into bracketing, you can see it's got the bracketing type is the only option, and by default this is just going to be set to off. So what we want to do is come into there, and you can see the one we're looking for. There are lots of different types of exposure bracketing, or not, well, different types of bracketing. I'm not going to run through them all. There's f-stop bracketing, focus and white balance bracketing, but the one we want is actually the exposure bracketing, which is this one here. So it's got the plus and the minus, so we'll jump into that, and then you can see now it's our options here are what bracketing options we're shooting at, and if we go to more settings we can actually tweak these. So we'll run through what this means. So the first thing we've got is our step, and we've got a number followed by a sort of a point or a circle and then a 1. Now if we click into it, we've got all these different ones, and essentially 7.1 or 7.1 means it's going to take 7 shots and they're going to be 1 exposure apart. So the left side is the amount of shots the camera's going to take, and the right side is the sort of difference per exposure. So it's going to be one stop apart there, and you can see down here that it's got the different kind of stops and the pictures it's going to take. So if we jump in, you can see we've got all kinds of different ones. So you can shoot them here. You could shoot 3 and they're just 1/3 of a stop apart, or you can shoot 3 and they're 2/3 of a stop apart, 3 1 stop apart, and so on, you know, 5 1/3, and then coming all the way down to 7. And depending on what I'm doing, sometimes I'll actually shoot 7 and 1, so I'll leave it at 7 and 1. And then in the sequence, this is actually, you can kind of see this here, so the sequence is what order it will take the shots in, and I always prefer it so it takes the first, oops, sorry, I've clicked into the wrong menu there, the first shot first. So it's 0 minus plus, so it shoots the exposure you want first, the correct exposure, or, you know, the one that you deem to be correct at the time, and then it will shoot the underexposures, so -1, and then it shoots the +1, -2, +2, -3, +3, and you can actually go in, and if you want to change that you can do it so it shoots the minus, and then the middle exposure, and then plus. So you can see if we press that it'll show the difference. So it does them in like a straight order there from lowest to highest. So you can see -3, -2, -1, 0, all the way through the other exposures as well, +1, +2, +3 in order. I prefer it this way just in case anything happens to the shot. I've got the correct shot is the first one generally, and then the HDRs are nice to have. So it's yeah, that's the order I'd go with. And then single shot settings, I never use the single shot, but basically the second option here is going to shoot them all in succession as quickly as the camera can do it, depending on the light and the settings you're using essentially. This one you shoot it individually, so each time you'll have to manually press the shutter. So if you're doing a bracket with 7 shots in it, you'll have to press the shutter 7 times. So we're just going to use this one because for me that makes sense, and I'll kind of go through how I generally do this, what settings I would use, and how I can get the best out of it. And then if we come back into the camera, I normally kind of shoot it in manual. So like I say, depending on what situation you're in, the expo meter might not be perfect, but here I'll try and get it to around 0, so it's at 0 there, and then we hold down the shutter or just press it once, and then you can see that's fired off 7 shots, and we can go back through and we can see they're all different exposures, and then from that we can kind of make our merge. And the reason the timer was on is, for me, it's purely the way I like to shoot them, because for HDR the camera's got to be really steady, so you want to have your camera on a solid tripod that's not moving, the head's locked in properly. And then also when you press the shutter, that introduces just a micro kind of jitter to the camera. So if you've got a 2-second timer on there, or maybe even slightly more, then the camera's going to have settled itself and it's kind of ready to shoot. So for me, I always do that. So you can use the in-camera timer. I'll link up into the corner. In the corner, I've done a video about that. The one just in the camera, which for me is the easiest one to use. But in certain situations where you need to be away from the camera, say you're shooting a tiny room, or you just don't want to be in the shot, what you can do is set Lumix sync up and have the timer ready there and remotely trigger it. And I've done a video again about Lumix sync up in the corner. So basically you've got all the tools you need really without having like remote cord shutters and all those kind of things. It's just kind of ready to go out of the box really. So that's really useful. You've just got all the modes that you kind of need. And then another thing probably to mention is you can do this either in RAW JPEG, or just RAW. So I do it in both. I get like a variety of images where I'll just shoot them all HDR, and then I've got the shots because the space isn't really a problem. I can just delete them afterwards. And then if I just want to use the well exposed RAW, I can do that. If I want to merge it into a HDR, I can do it. It just gives me flexibility. If it needs to all be delivered quickly and I think the JPEGs are passable, sometimes I'll just do that. There's different properties kind of require different amounts of work going into things, so I'll just generally shoot it so I've got everything I need, and then I'll just make the decision in post, which isn't always the best way to do it, but I've got quite a quick workflow for kind of HDR and dealing with photos, so I'll cover that in another video. But yeah, essentially that is most of what you need to do really, just to at least get stable kind of HDR images. I mean, another thing to consider really is that when you're shooting this, I'm talking about property shots, so they're pretty static. There isn't a lot going on. If there are trees waving around in the windows and things like that, that can cause problems because obviously the shots are all different. So you've kind of got to judge it, on each case. So it's worth having to think about it before you shoot it. If everything's moving, it's not going to work very well, so make sure they're good static kind of shots. And the other thing, if you're shooting in dark rooms or anything like that, the exposures can be quite long, because I'll tend to want my ISO to be really low, so they're just kind of clean shots. I've not done that here for the example, but yeah, you'll want to have sometimes there'll be quite long exposure shots, and the camera can be going for quite a while, sort of running the exposure on those, and obviously little jitters and things can be introduced. So again, it's just to do it on a case by case, and you'll quickly get to grips with it. Another thing a lot of people will say about is turning off in-body stabilization, which I was originally doing, and then there's been a couple of times where I haven't switched it off. And I'll be honest, I've not noticed any difference. It doesn't degrade the quality at all. I don't find that the in-body stabilization is having any issues whilst the camera's shooting. So it's, yeah, for me it's been completely fine. You know, you're welcome to obviously switch it off if you feel like that's the best practice, but like I said, I've done it both ways and I feel like both shots were just comparable. There was no real difference there. The next thing to sort of think about is also you want to switch into manual mode for this. Just, I mean, for me, I use an aperture that was getting everything really in focus as best as I can, and then I'll just switch it into manual. You don't want the camera focusing every time, otherwise you're going to end up with inconsistent shots. And also, if you're going to try and use a flash as well, which I'll do sometimes, but not really for HDR very often, you'll need to make sure that the flash can cycle fast enough to keep up with the shots. And if you're kind of interested in a more sort of in-depth overview on how I kind of work with HDR and what my workflow is, sort of, you know, during the shoot and post-shoot, I'll do another video on that. Just let me know in the comments if, you know, that's something you'd like to see. And yeah, if this video's been helpful, give it a like. And if you want to see more about the Panasonic GH6 or Lumix cameras in general, check out the playlist on this channel and please subscribe.